much for coming out tonight. I would just like to briefly mention that programs here are made possible by our annual Friends of the Library campaign. So thank you so much for your continued support to make programs like these available to the community. Tonight we have a very special, close-to-home guest. She drew upon her extensive research and experiences living in the San Francisco Bay Area and the Loire Valley, which I'm sure she'll have great stories about, to create the story for The Vintner's Daughter, the first in a series about the changing world of vineyard life at the turn of the century. She has a degree in economics from Villanova University, and she currently resides here in Darien, Connecticut, where she's been for the past 14 years. And she actually did a lot of her research here at the library, which I'm sure she'll talk about, but she thanked several of us librarians in her acknowledgments. So I just want everyone to know that if you ever write a book, that is a good way to have an event here, is if you thank us in your acknowledgement. Please join me in welcoming to Darien Library, Miss Kristen Harnish.
Welcome everybody, and thank you so much for coming out on this busy fall evening. I really appreciate your presence here, and I'm so excited to share with you my debut novel, The Vintner's Daughter, and also my experiences researching the novel, and here at the library, and also traveling to France and to Napa, Sonoma, to research winemaking in the 19th century. So I thought what I would do tonight is give you a little synopsis about the novel, and then take you through winemaking in the 19th century, and then do a little Q&A, and then a book signing, if that sounds good. But before I get into all that, I have many people to thank. First of all, Erin Shea, thank you so much for providing us with wine. I think she deserves a round of applause. Now, I'll have you know you're actually drinking Vouvray White, which is in the book, okay, and Napa Red. So, very exciting, very thematic, okay? And then I also want to thank the librarians who were so influential in helping me give birth to this book, which took a really long time. In particular, I mention Tina Bothy, Blanche Parker, and Sally Iams in the acknowledgments, because I was here every weekend, picking their brains, ordering books from around the state and around the country, everything from where the railroad lines went back in the late 1800s to French criminal and civil code from the Napoleonic Code, and they were finding it for me. They were amazing. And then of course I want to thank Barrett Bookstore, and Rosanna here is with us tonight to help sell the books. But Barrett has been absolutely phenomenal at not only stocking the book, but talking it up in the store, putting it on the recommended table, and I was telling Rosanna, this is my first novel, so every time I go into Barrett and I see it there, I just do the little happy dance out to the car. It's just such an exciting thing to have that happen. And to be able to achieve your dream of writing a novel is a wonderful, marvelous thing. But to be able to share it with all the people who helped you achieve it is something it's just awesome. So I thank you all for being here, and the town of Darien and everybody in it has been so supportive. And my neighbors are all here. Thanks, guys. We have book clubs here, and I love to do book clubs, by the way. So by all means, contact me through my website, invite me to your book club. I don't drink too much, and I love to talk. Okay, so let's get started. Let me see. Okay, so the summary of the novel. Let me take you through this. For those of you who haven't read The Vintner's Daughter, it is the story of a spirited winemaker's daughter named Sarah Thibault. And Sarah Thibault is struggling to reclaim her family's 19th century Loire Valley vineyard, which was stolen by a rival family in her eyes. Through a series of very tragic events, this journey takes Sarah from her family's vineyard in Vouvray, in the middle of the Loire, which is located right near Amboise on the Loire River. It takes her from there, really on the run, to Manhattan's Lower East Side and the slums there, and then finally out to Napa, the rolling hills and sprawling vineyards of Napa. And when she meets the younger son of the rival family unexpectedly in a Napa vineyard, she knows that he's the one man who could either restore her family's vineyard to her or prosecute her for her crime. So There's a lot of fun in that, a lot of good reading. It's a very fast-paced book, I think you'll find. But one of the things that I really wanted to stress about the book is it's really about the winemaking process and the business of winemaking in the late 1800s. It is also a seemingly impossible love story between two people who are hell-bent on succeeding in the winemaking industry, no matter what the cost. And they do that in very different ways. So hopefully you find it entertaining. So what I'm going to do now is just take you through, let me just say, I'm not an expert in wines. Before I started this book, I really didn't know much about wines. In fact, I just like to drink them. But I'm going to take you through my process and what I learned, and then you'll be up to speed. And then you'll know everything I know. And then so on. Okay, so, sorry. Okay, so vines and wines. One of the first things I realized in my research is that there are many different types of vine plantings. What you see up there, that is trellis-trained vines. Those are those beautiful, pristine rows of vines that we see when we're walking through the Napa vineyards or the Long Island vineyards. And those are very typical of how vines are planted now. And this particular vineyard is in Carneros. It's Bouchain Vineyards. I was actually just there over Columbus Day weekend. We had a book signing there. It was super fun. They just finished harvest. And the grapes that you see right there are Pinot Noir. They make a wonderful Pinot Noir. And those are, actually that's called Veraison, which is basically the French word for the ripening, and takes place during June usually in the Carneros vineyards, and that just gives you a nice idea of what those vineyards look like. Now, in comparison to that, okay, so this is my mother and I. It was the best picture to show you what I was going to talk about. So my mom and I took her by limo around to a bunch of family-owned vineyards in Napa in 2013, and we had a blast. And our tour guide was phenomenal in terms of the history of Napa. So he showed us a bunch of different things. But this right here, those in back of us are Zinfandel vines that were planted in 1901. And they still make wine off those vines, off those grapes. Yeah, and those are, you can see how they're all like floppy. See the thing on the right? Those are head-trained vines. And so vines in the late 1800s, early 1900s weren't trellis. They were mostly head-trained, so they just kind of, and they didn't bear as much fruit as the trellis-trained vines, and the trellis design was eventually created to give the grapes more sunlight and more, even sunlight, even rain. So it's actually a better way of doing it. But I just wanted to show you that because back in the old days, that's kind of how they did it. This is fun. Sorry if you're eating. An important part of the book actually is the difficulty that the vineyardists had with the phylloxera. The phylloxera bug was probably the most pervasive in the late 1800s, particularly in France and in Napa. And this bug is it's plant lice. It's like the same lice your kid gets in their hair, except it's evolved and now it's on plant. And what it does is, as you can see on the right-hand side, it gets inside the root of the vine and sucks the plant dry of all its nutrients.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really creepy. And there's no cure for it except to graft the vine to American-resistant rootstock. However, back in the late 1800s, the French and the Americans, but mostly the French, had some very unique ways of trying to solve this problem in the vineyards. They did everything from letting the chickens run around wild, hoping they'd eat the insects, to planting dead toads underneath the grapevines in hopes that the spirit of the toad would ward off the insect. And they even pumped sulfide chemicals into the ground, which did work for a little bit, but then what happened is the nearby apple trees and pear trees and other plants would die. So that wasn't successful either. So this was really something that plagued both French and American vineyards. And as a matter of fact, by 1870 in France, 40% of the French vineyards were wiped out by this bug.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, it was startling. And then I knew I had a really good plot point. I had a really good something that could really interest, hopefully, the reader. But also, by the 1890s in Napa, 60% of the vines were dead. And in the book, this creates a huge opportunity for our male protagonist named Philippe. So you can read about that, but so today, the phylloxera has pretty much been eradicated in that all the new vines have resistant rootstock that is immune to this type of bug. But they still have other types of bugs that they have to worry about, and rodents, and just things that eat our garden, eat the grapevines as well, and grapes. So you see on the left there, that's an owl box, and that's typical. You find that in the Carneros vineyards of Napa. And just to step back for a minute, the Carneros vineyards, Carneros is its own AVA, and it comprises part of Sonoma and the lower part of Napa. Okay, so and the book is set partly in Carneros, so just geographically where we're talking. So that's an owl box that was designed to lure the owls there, so they nest and eat most of the rodents, like the gophers and the larger animals. And then there are also bluebird boxes, because the bluebirds are great at eating the smaller insects. And on the right there, those are actually grapes, Cabernet grapes that are shriveled by the sun, but I thought it would give you a good indication of what it would look like if the phylloxera had eaten, or killed the vine, started to kill the vine. And now I want to take you through 3 of my favorite historic Napa wineries. These are all pictures from my trip in 2013 and my recent trip a couple weekends ago. This right here is Ragushi Winery, which is in Napa. And this was one of the first wineries established. Really, the first wineries out there were in the 1870s for the most part. And you can see that on the right-hand side, oh, hello, wow, that worked, okay. On the right-hand side there, you can see that, that's where they store the wine. But that's a very old, that's the original, been restored 1878 winery. So that was kind of cool. This here is Beringer, and we just went to Beringer. Has anyone here been to Beringer in Napa? Okay, how cool is that, right? If you go out there, do not miss it. It's just a sight to behold. The Beringer brothers, Jacob and Frederick, established their winery in 1877, as you see from the cornerstone. And Jacob actually had come over from Germany before Frederick to work for Charles Krug as his cellarman at a winery right next door. But when he got there and he worked the land and worked the wines for a while, he wrote back to his brother Frederick and said, "You got to come over, because they've got land here and this is just right for the kinds of wines that we want to make." So Frederick came over and they established their winery, and the rest is history. It's been in operation since 1877. This is the inside of the Rhine House, which is the large mansion on the Beringer estate. And the Rhine House was actually built around windows, stained glass windows that they had ordered from Germany, I think. And so they built the house around these windows. And if you look, the upper left-hand corner is the inside of the beautiful cascading staircase, which is now, this is now the, the gift shop. And then on the lower left-hand corner, you can tell I've been wine tasting there. Those are my new friends Tim and Kim at Beringer. They're tour guides there and very knowledgeable in wine. And I put that picture in there because you can see behind us are 2 figures in the stained glass windows, and those are Frederick and Jacob Beringer, and they're dressed as Swiss guards, of all things, the guards that protect the Pope. I think they thought very highly of themselves at that point in time. And this is Hess Winery, which is also really lovely. It's located at the base of Mount Veeder, where they make a lot of their wines. And this winery was built in about 1903, and it's the original winery. It's been restored, but that was also a great place to visit. And it's an example of a gravity flow winery, which we'll talk about a little bit later. This is a cool picture because this is in the vineyard circa 1900. This was from the Hess estate. And I think this is about springtime in Napa. And you can see it's mostly women in white. And I wondered, were they there on a Sunday? I don't know. It was interesting. this picture fascinates me for a lot of reasons. But you can see the vines are head-trained vines. They're not trellised. And I think that what they're doing is pruning on a Sunday afternoon, if I had to guess. I think even the rest is reworking. But this picture, actually, I sent to the creative director at HarperCollins Canada. And that's why the book has the lady in white on the cover. So, which I think he did a great job on. So this is where it comes from. So gravity flow winemaking had its advent in Napa in the 1870s. And this is kind of cool because this picture is of Hess Winery in Napa, California. And this is the second level of the winery, which is the fermenting barrels. And so a gravity flow winery works very simply to help make wine through the use of gravity as opposed to different hoses and pipes and things like that. It's a more organic way to process the grape and make wine. And so in this type of winery that was invented really by H.W. McIntyre, who was an engineer in the 1870s, it starts on the third floor, and the horses, either by wagon or they pull an elevator lift, take the grapes up to the third floor, where the grapes are crushed, destemmed in some cases, and the white grapes would be pressed. And then the sludge for the red wine would come down these chutes right there into the fermenting tanks. And then they ferment there for anywhere from a week to 4 weeks. And then the juice drips down through holes in the floor to the bottom level, which is usually the cellar area that's made of stone, so it's nice and cool. And that's where the wines will be stored and aged. And that's basically how a gravity flow winery works. And they're still in use to this day, a little more technologically advanced, but most wineries use this design. So fermenting and aging, this is, this is at Beringer. We took these photos. My husband is holding at the bottom of the screen there what's called a bung. And a bung, it says Napa Valley Bung Works, and the bung is the cork in the big barrel. That's what it's called. On the left-hand side is an old redwood fermenting tank. On the right-hand side is an cask for aging wine. And I would guess it's French oak. That's pretty much what's used there. So this is really an interesting part of Napa history. The Chinese coolie laborers, came over and helped build the railroads out there in California. And then when they were done with that, all that labor kind of shifted into the winemaking industry. And in this case, the Beringers used the Chinese laborers to chip away 1,200 linear feet of limestone caves in the Beringer estate. And you can still see, we were just there, and you can feel it, you can still see where the little pickaxes picked away. And so they worked for quite some time on that. And that is where they store and age their wine. And the Chinese are also mentioned in the book. They're a big part of Sarah's entry into Napa. So barrels and bottles. This is kind of fun because there was a big argument back in the late 1800s about, do you ship barrels or do you ship bottles? You could walk into any grocery store in Napa, with your pitcher, and just turn the spigot, get your, gallon of wine or whatever, and walk out. And that's really how they sold wine locally. But if you're going to ship it to the East Coast, a lot of people chose to ship it in barrels because it was cheaper, but it didn't always get there. Sometimes the railway men would kind of reach the barrels, drink the wine, and fill it up with vinegar or water. And then when it arrived, then no one would know until it arrived. So the winemakers of the time started getting wise to that and started bottling their own wines. And this is an example, I don't know if you can see it. So right here, it says 1902. So that was bottled in 1902. When you look at the bottle, there's about that much left. It's probably vinegar. But the Boal is the name of the winery, and it was established in 1816. So that was bottled in 1902. I just thought it was cool because it was a great representation of how labels used to look. But a lot of winemakers turned to bottling, not only because they didn't want their wine stolen, but also because they wanted to start branding their wine and really distributing it. And this was a new concept at the end of the 1800s. So A lot of the wiser ones did that, even though it cost more to ship. And I put this slide in for my husband because we were touring the vineyards. Anyone who knows Dave knows he's a math guy, he's a spreadsheet guy, he wants to know the numbers. And it was a good question, like we're in the middle of the vineyard, just like, I know, I get it, I see the barrels, I see the casks, but what, like, how many grapes does it take to make something? Like, what? And so this is for him and for you. So 1 acre yields 2 to 10 tons of grapes. 1 ton of grapes yields nearly 2.5 barrels, which equals 60 cases. A case is 12 bottles, which equals 720 bottles of wine. And 1 barrel, like the barrels we just saw, equals 60 gallons, which is 25 cases, 300 bottles. It's a lot. 1 bottle equals 5 glasses of wine. One of the things that was surprising to me when I wrote the novel was how much math I needed to do in the novel, because you have hectares and you have acres, and so there's a lot of math in there, but it serves its purpose, so that was fun learning all that. And now shipping the wine, there were 2 ways to ship wine. Locally, they use the Napa River, which is there on the right, and to take it to the larger cities like San Francisco and Chicago and the eastern cities, which they did back then, they'd use the local train station. And this is actually an artist rendering of the Susquehanna Station, which was in Napa at the time and used in the late 1800s to transport wine. So that's kind of fun. The other thing, because the book is about the business of winemaking, a lot of the research I had to do was on the economics of the time and the trade. And I found this trade paper. Actually, the librarians here tipped me off to archive.org, which is an amazing source of information for old documents. And on there, lo and behold, I found the Pacific Wine and Spirit Review. So I read through years of this old paper to discover what the wineries and the winemakers were up against at the time. It covered everything from the wine prices, the amount of wines being shipped to different locations and overseas, the amount of wines being blended, the various pricing, the scientific innovations in winemaking. Trellis training became popular around 1900. And so all that and how that was done. And so the details you see in the book, a lot of those are taken from the pages of this trade review. So, oh, and this is a kind of a fun story. So just to illustrate for you how important the Darien Library has been in this book and in the audiobook, I have this little story to share with you. I came here for an event shortly after the release of the book in August. And it was an audiobook event, because when I published my book, I retained the rights to the audiobook. And I had a lot of people come up to me and ask me, when is the audiobook coming out? Because this is, and my own son loves audiobooks and reads better with audio. And I said, gee, I should really look into that. So I came to this event they were hosting. They had 2 narrators, professional narrators, and the head of Random House's audio book publishing unit. And they talked and chatted, and I learned so much. And so I struck up a conversation with Tavia Gilbert, who is one of the narrators, a very accomplished, lovely voice. She had kind of a young voice, which I really liked. And so we started an email dialogue. And I was really surprised when she said to me, I could produce this myself, or I can just, if you don't want to front the money, let me introduce you to some of my, people I know, like Blackstone or, Audible, and I said, okay, I'm not going to turn that down. So she introduced me to the acquisitions editor at Blackstone Audio. And so, I didn't know this woman from Adam, but I'm like, I'm going to let the book speak for itself. I'm just going to send her a copy and hope for the best. So 2 weeks went by, and I didn't hear anything. I'm used to hearing crickets. And I said, okay, I'm just going to send her the follow-up email, get the rejection, and move on. And so I sent her the follow-up email, did you receive the book, hope you liked it, blah, 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 blah. She sent me back an offer to publish the book. And now they have worldwide English rights to distribute The Vintner's Daughter, which could not have happened without the Darien Library. So that was just super cool. And now you're seeing this, we just finalized the cover yesterday. So you're the first to see it. And it's out November 1st. So I'm gonna shut up now, so y'all can ask me questions about anything. It doesn't have to be about this, it could be about anything. Yes?
Did you hook up with somebody in France, like a library or a historian?
Yes, that's a great question. I totally skipped that part of my talk. Okay, so the inspiration for this book actually came, can you all hear me? Okay. The inspiration for the book came when I was on a trip to the Loire Valley with my family in 2000. And I was standing in the middle of a Loire Valley vineyard in Vouvray and just saw the Chenin Blanc grapes, saw the whitewashed winery and the beautiful ledge of limestone where the family had carved out their cellars. And I just thought this would be a perfect spot, perfect setting for the novel that I've always secretly wanted to write, because I was a banker before this. So that's when it started. And so yes, I got a lot of information from the winemakers there on my trip. And also the library had some phenomenal books about the history of the Loire Valley. And so,
I mean, over there in France, did you hook up with a major library over there, or?
no, I did not. In fact, most of the books that I got were through this library, but they were French written by French, yeah, and translated. But that's a great question. Yeah. Did I answer? Yeah.
And the second thing, if I may,
Yeah.
the thing that you're attracted to with the white, the picture with the ladies with the white
Yes.
dresses, if I may, I think that might have been more practical. I mean, today white means something to us, but back then, women even got married in black dresses.
Well, that's a good point.
It had no significance.
It was just-
and white reflects the sun if they were working outside. So that was probably it. I mean, you would.
That's probably it. Thank you. That's good. I like the look, though. Don't you like the look?
Yeah.
It's kind of, yeah, because they didn't do that in this one, which is fine. You needed something different, but that's really good. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
I have a question. So, you said earlier that sometimes before they transported bottles, they would, you could just, I'm assuming like in a casual way, just go to the bar and get like this.
Yeah.
So when did, I also associate wine with something that's a little more cultured, a little bit, a nice bed, a little nice wine. This. So, when in history it sort of became less of a just, a general common social thing to something a little more,
Right.
Sort of illustrates and defines taste.
That's a really good question. The question is, when did wine become something that was more like something defining taste and a little more refined and that kind of thing? And I think it started, I don't know the exact answer to that question, but from what I've read, I would guess that it started in Europe. And it was like that for centuries in Europe. But in America, it really started around this time. Because that's when you actually, if you go to even like, I had to do this research for the second book, it's a series, the Army Parker Hotel in Boston, for example. I dug up an old menu from 1896. And it was interesting because they had maybe 3 or 4 wines that were like Charles Krug and some real names that you knew. But the rest were just, they weren't names. They were just red or, whatever. And so I would say it was starting to make that transition probably in the early 1900s, right before Prohibition.
Right?
It's kind of probably, I would guess, when it became that way in the U.S. Great question. Yes.
I noticed that you used prohibition in this book, even though it really hadn't come into its full force.
It had, but it was still a threat at that time.
It was a threat, yeah.
Right.
So did you come across that when you were reading some of these?
I did, because, yes, in fact, in the Pacific Wine and Spirit Review, the question is, even though this takes place in about 1896, was the Prohibition movement still kind of coming about, and was it a threat? And in fact, it was in the papers. And they had a lot, it was linked to the temperance movement. And you had a lot of, Bible wielding, it's fine. I mean, they really felt that liquor, especially hard alcohol, not so much wine, they went after the wine later, but it was more the hard alcohol at that point that was eroding society and causing men to go astray and, breaking up families, which of course it does if there's that problem. But so that's when it really started to, back in the late 1800s, and also in correspondence with the women's rights movement. Yes, and this is going to be a big part of the second book in the book.
Well, I also like the piece where Philippe apparently kind of converted. I think it was her inspiration, but he contacted the local Roman Catholic
Oh, that's a really good, yes, I didn't
In
cover that.
order
in
to
my
have a menu for the wine, did you come across that?
I did come across that, yeah. So here's part of the book, our male protagonist, Philippe Lemieux, struggling to get his vineyard up and running. And Sarah, who's working for him, basically says, he asks for her opinion. And she's like, well, if I were you, I'd go and talk to the local archdiocese and start making some sacramental wine. Because if this is coming down the pike, you're going to have some sort of, buffer, some sort of hedge against prohibition, among other things. And so those were the kind of things, that might have been a little early, but that probably happened more around the early 1900s, but the Beringer brothers actually made it through prohibition by making sacramental wine. Yeah, so that's a big part of the story. Trying to find other ways to make money, given all these threats to the winemaking business. Yes.
In that period of time, when the really French people who came over and started, was that?
Yeah, what's
name any
interesting?
French.
Yes. And so that was the other thing that really interested me about this experience is what do you do when you're an immigrant and you're coming over? What is that experience like? A lot of the immigrants were from Italy and Germany, primarily, but there were also French. Those were the big ones. Those were the big contingencies, but there were some from Hungarian as well. And so what was that experience like? A lot of them came to Napa because the soil there was very similar to the soil they were used to in the old country. And so they knew they could bring something there. And so thank God they did, because they created a beautiful industry for California. Great question. Yes.
Wasn't there a serendipitous event with the phylloxera? Did you know about that? Where the grapes, I haven't been. Where the grapes got dense and sweet and concentrated, and they made a famous sweet wine out of it.
I think
Maybe Chateau d'Yquem.
What's funny is I was online today. I saw that today. Yeah, but I hadn't come across it beforehand. So she's saying that actually the phylloxera damaged vines, those grapes, were actually used to make very dense sweet wine. So making lemonade out of lemons.
And it was kind of a new discovery, I think.
Yeah, no, I hadn't come across that, so that's really cool. So we're on the same wavelength. Well, Eileen, did you have a question? Yes, Ben.
I have kind of an impertinent question, but is there any good reason for those of us who are not great wine connoisseurs, blending connoisseurs, why we would drift toward getting Napa wines because we hear all this PR about how great the wines are from Napa? Was there anything that you discovered that proves that point? You doing the research on the book? Or is it just
It's personal preference. It really is personal
So
preference.
there's nothing about the soil or the air?
Well, the terroir there is different, and this is described in the book too. There's different areas that make different kinds of wine because of the terroir. In the lower region of Carneros, they have this bay, the breezes from the San Pablo Bay. They've got the clay and the rocky soil, and it's the stressed soil, and so it makes very strong wines. And it's different as you go up in the valley. So really it's a matter of personal taste. And I would say one of the things that I learned was I will pay $40 for a bottle of wine now that I know what they go through. I don't do it often, but I will do it. At the same time, I had a lovely wine that a gentleman recommended to me the other day. It was $6.99. It was Foxwood. He was like, this is great pizza wine. Yeah. I'm like, okay. And it was good, great pizza wine. So it's really a question of, one of the things I did learn though that distinguishes Napa wines, I think, a little bit from the French wines is that I was talking to a winemaker this weekend at Bouchain, and he had me line up the 3 Chardonnays that they have, and then pour them all in one glass, and then take a taste, and they were still awesome. And one of the things he said to me, he says, we create the wine around the food, not the other way around. And so they're very, very, and I'm sure they are parts of France as well, but in California as a whole, they really try to create the wines to go with food, not to overpower. So that's interesting.
So just a quick follow-up. Before I run into our friend Joe Donald, and I know he was
Oh, yes,
an
yes,
inspiration to you.
yes.
Can you tell us how much of an inspiration he was? Or
Yes.
I should just say thanks a lot, Joe, or buy some of this $50+
Yeah. And Joe is actually in the acknowledgement. So Joe Donlin was a resident of Darien for years. He now lives in Rouen, and he makes wine. He actually buys his grapes from like he leases like 5 different vineyards out in the Napa Sonoma area. His office is based in Santa Rosa there, and that's where they make their wine. And I actually did an interview with him. You can go to my website and take a look at it. And he gave me a lot of great information about, you know, his journey and why it's so important to him and the research he did in France and Burgundy. And so we talked about that. And then he also introduced me to his winemaker, Tyler Thomas, who read over the scenes in the book for accuracy, which was really awesome. So Joe Donlin has been a huge inspiration to me. And I actually really enjoy his wines. They're boutique wines, they're expensive, but they're for that special occasion. And his Nancy Chardonnay is my favorite.
Just what again, please?
His Nancy Chardonnay is really my favorite. Yes.
So how long do we have to wait with folks here?
That's a great question. I'm butting heads with my editor right now, and I really want to have it out in the fall of 2015, which to me is not soon enough, and probably not to you guys, but but it's interesting. I finished the book. I mean, I did, but now we're going through the editing process. Sequels are hard. Sequels are hard because it has to be a book that stands on its own, and at the same time wants the reader to, you know, if the reader has read the first book, you want to, you know, you want the writing to really, I want to go back and read that. But it's also, it's tricky. You don't want to rely too much on the action from the first book to fuel the second book. So we're having some creative differences right now, but we'll resolve it, because my editor's awesome, but, you know, yeah.
Similar characters, or do you take
Yes,
different?
yes. So we're going to pick up right where we left off with Sarah. I'm not going to give it away. Okay, I can't give it away to people who haven't read it. Same cast of characters. We're bringing back some characters you thought were gone. And then we're going to develop Marie's story a little bit more. Marie is the midwife that Sarah meets in New York. And she's going to be coming out to San Francisco to get her physician's license and work as a surgeon. So that's a whole other world I had to research for the second book, which is a lot of fun. Oh, yeah.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you say, how important was going on locations?
Critical.
to your story?
Critical. I didn't realize it until I was there.
Good question.
Yeah. Oh, the question is, how important was it in writing the book to actually go on location and be in those places? And I'll tell you why it was important. You know what? It was important to like feel the soil, taste the soil. Like when I was in the vineyard, I took soil home with me because it's like this porous, rocky soil that I need to describe. I walked through the vineyards. I looked at the, you know, the ground cover they use. I felt the leaves. I learned about the different kinds of grapes. I smelled it. Because the best way to put a reader in the scene is to use all the senses. And that's what I try to do. And if I am able to transport the reader to this world, then I have succeeded. You know? So it's a really good question. It's really important to go on location for me.
What was your background before you?
I was a banker for 9 years. And then I stayed home to raise my kids. And while I was having my kids, I started taking writing classes and like had this little dream in the back of my head. And it took me like about 14 years to get it together and finally get this thing out. But it was worth it. It was a really great process. Yeah. And yes.
In one of your slides, you showed Zinfandel grapes,
Yes.
and 9 times out of 10, when I go into a restaurant and ask for white Zinfandel, they don't have it.
Right, they have the red.
Well, no, they'll just say, we have a rosé.
Oh, yeah.
And why do you think, are Zinfandel grapes, do they not grow as many? Are they more expensive if you make the wine, or
Gosh,
you don't have any idea?
I don't have any idea. The question is, why can't I get a white Zinfandel? Do you know the answer?
White Zinfandel is pretty inexpensive, actually.
Right.
Oh.
Very inexpensive. My husband went in to buy some because that's what my father likes.
Okay.
And they kind of hide a few bottles in the back.
They
So
hide.
if you're really a wine connoisseur, that's not the wine for you, Jen. But it's for all personal pleasure.
Listen, I once drank out of the bar.
Just
I'm not a snob.
It's all what you like. I mean, you know what should dictate
It
your
is.
taste.
That's
But I mean,
exactly
some of the
right.
wine stores,
Yeah, but white Zinfandel was like totally the rage, like, what, in the like 90s, I remember? Yes, I think so. I know, it's just like,
Yeah, okay.
and I think that they can guide you on it, but I don't think there's a real reason.
All
for
right.
it. It is personal taste. Yes.
Could you talk about the title,
Oh, The Vintner's Daughter?
how that came from? Was that yours?
That was
Did it
mine.
go with it?
Yeah.
Did that just as a post?
It just came.
The idea came with the book's idea.
You know, when I was standing in that vineyard in the Loire Valley, what I didn't tell you is I saw the beautiful setting, but I also saw a woman walking through the vines. And I knew she wasn't a current day woman. I knew she was from like probably the 1800s. In my head, this is where it was going, and that's the basis for the story. And so I think I wanted to write it about the vintner's daughter because there's a real shift that goes, you know, as a woman, when you identify with your family in your early years of life, and then something happens, and it can be a good thing or it can be catastrophic, where you have to make that switch to thinking of yourself as independent of them. And that's what this journey is for her. It's about how do I make that switch and do it in a way when I have everything crumbling around me with some bit of grace. And I don't know if she succeeds or not in that, but it certainly is a fast-paced, moving story. So, but yeah, no, that just came to me. Yeah. As things do.